August 13, 2014, after 8 years lingering in the shadow of death row, Lisa Ann Coleman faced her final moments, executed by lethal injection in Texas. But to unveil the dark journey that led her to the execution gurney, we must peel back the layers of a chilling case, returning to July 2004, and tracing the footsteps of a 9-year-old boy named Davontae Williams. This wasn't a sudden death. It was the culmination of a prolonged period of neglect and torture right in his own home. This case isn't just about murder. It exposes critical flaws in the child protection system and raises agonizing questions about the responsibility of adults who were supposed to care for him. Can the death of one child force society to confront the darkest corners of indifference and domestic abuse? In today's video, we'll explore the final meal this woman chose, and the last words she spoke before her life ended, as we unravel a dark chapter in U.S. judicial history. This case revolves around Davontae Williams, a boy born prematurely in June 1995, carrying developmental disabilities from birth. At the time of his death, on July 26, 2004, Davontae was just 9 years old, weighing a mere 35 pounds, his body riddled with 250 scars and infected wounds where he had been tied with plastic cords. He was a frail child, in desperate need of care and love, yet he endured relentless and cruel abuse until he withered away. Davontae was brutally and slowly stripped of his life. The two main perpetrators in this case were Marcella L. Williams, Davontae's mother, born in February 1981, and Lisa Ann Coleman, Marcella's girlfriend, born on October 6, 1975, in Tarrant County, Texas. Coleman grew up in an incredibly disadvantaged environment. She was conceived during a rape, beaten by her stepfather, moved through multiple foster homes, sexually abused by foster parents, and exposed to drugs and alcohol early on. She only completed the 10th grade, had a child at 16, and had served time in prison for theft and drug possession. Marcella Williams herself was also a subject of CPS investigation before meeting Coleman due to neglecting Davontae when he was an infant. Could such a violent and unstable past truly define their path to cruelty, or is it merely an excuse for their heinous actions? From 1999, Davontae's life plunged into tragedy. He and his sister were removed from the home due to concerns of physical abuse. When CPS investigated, Davontae was noted to have hair loss, bruises on his back, and swelling of his lips and penis. Clear signs of abuse. CPS found that Coleman was the one who abused Davontae and had placed both siblings in foster care. Marcella Williams regained custody of her children after a year, with one strict condition: she had to stay away from Coleman. But tragically, Marcella ignored that warning, pulling Davontae into a new spiral of suffering. In October 2002, when Davontae was in first grade, CPS received another serious allegation. The boy was being physically and medically neglected. Instead of cooperating, Coleman and Marcella began to hide Davontae, preventing him from attending school or seeing a doctor. They even created an elaborate facade, leading school officials to believe the family had moved out of the district. CPS investigators visited the Williams home 9 times between November 13 and December 30, 2002, to follow up on allegations, but Davontae and his family seemed to vanish without a trace. This deliberate concealment severed Davontae's contact with the outside world, trapping him in the clutches of his tormentors. On July 26, 2004, the curtain on this tragedy finally fell. Marcella Williams called 911, telling the dispatcher that Davontae had stopped breathing at their home in Arlington, Texas. As the dispatcher tried to guide Marcella through CPR, the call inexplicably disconnected. When emergency medical personnel arrived, Coleman stated that Davontae had stopped breathing minutes earlier. However, the obvious rigor mortis betrayed them. Davontae had been dead for at least several hours. An autopsy revealed that Davontae, at just 9 years old, weighed only 35 pounds, an unimaginable weight for a child his age. His body was covered in 250 scars, evidence of relentless beatings. There were infected wounds on his wrists and ankles, where he had been tied with plastic cords. A fresh laceration on his lip and a healing tear on his ear were also found. Most notably, a blood stain was discovered on a golf club inside the house, suggesting Davontae might have been beaten with it. What drove Marcella and Lisa to act with such barbarity towards a frail, innocent child? Immediately, Coleman and Marcella Williams were both arrested and charged with injury to a child. They were held in Arlington on $200,000, 0 cents bail. Davontae's two older sisters, aged 3 and 6, were fortunately placed in foster care after their brother's death. A CPS spokesperson stated the girls appeared healthy. This was a rare glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak picture. The Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office conducted an autopsy and reached a heartbreaking conclusion. Davontae died from severe malnutrition, with pneumonia also contributing to his death. During the subsequent investigation, faced with undeniable evidence, Coleman finally confessed to authorities that she sometimes beat Davontae with a belt and, with Marcella Williams' help, she tied Davontae up. This confession revealed the horrifying truth of what the boy had endured. The charges against the two women were later upgraded to capital murder. To sustain the capital murder charge against Coleman, the state of Texas needed to prove the existence of an aggravating circumstance, such as a second felony that Coleman committed during the course of the murder. Citing evidence that Davontae had been tied up and confined in a pantry, prosecutors presented kidnapping as the key aggravating factor in Coleman's case. Marcella Williams accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to life in prison, ineligible for parole until 2044. This decision closed one part of the case, but for many, Marcella's sentence wasn't enough. Marcella's aunt, Tracy Williams, publicly stated in 2014 that the family felt Marcella should also have been sentenced to death. She said the family blamed both women for Davontae's death and emphasized that Marcella had a responsibility to protect her son from harm. Meanwhile, Lisa and Coleman refused a plea agreement and chose to go to trial for capital murder, pushing the case into a difficult court battle. Did Coleman believe she would escape justice when facing such clear evidence and the harshest penalty of the law? The trial of Lisa Ann Coleman began before Judge Everett Young on June 7, 2006, in Tarrant County. It was an emotional and tense trial, where justice for Davontae was sought. The prosecution painted a grim picture of the cruelty Davontae suffered. They emphasized that Davontae's home was full of food, and while the rest of the family ate well, Davontae was deliberately starved. Prosecutors particularly highlighted the presence of 250 scars and numerous bruises on Davontae's body, asserting this was undeniable evidence that the boy was regularly beaten and tied up. They also presented the shocking detail that the boy's ear appeared to have been partially torn by the golf club found in the house, a brutal instrument of torture. Meanwhile, Coleman's defense attorney, Michael Heisgel, attempted to find justifications. He accused prosecutors of hastily blaming Coleman for a death caused by poor parenting rather than murder. Heisgel asserted that Coleman did not actually live regularly with Marcella and Davontae Williams. He also argued that Davontae was small because he was born prematurely and sometimes needed to be restrained due to his hyperactivity, in an attempt to lessen the severity of the tying up behavior. However, witness testimonies overturned all defense arguments. Dr. Daniel Conselman, the Tarrant County Medical Examiner, testified extensively about Davontae's condition. He stated that Davontae's body was so bruised and scarred that he initially suspected blunt force trauma as the cause of death before determining malnutrition was the primary factor. He declared Davontae was not adequately fed and his diet lacked protein to the extent that his body began breaking down fat and muscle to survive. Conserman also emphasized that the lack of protein made Davontae's wounds difficult to heal. The most horrifying detail was that Davontae had very little fat around his heart, an extremely unusual characteristic in healthy children. One of Davontae's sisters, who had by then been adopted, testified extensively that Coleman lived with the family and sometimes tied Davontae up, confirming the abuse allegations. Even Davontae's first-grade teacher testified about his hyperactivity, but also confirmed his academic potential and that he often had to sit next to her due to behavioral issues, indirectly suggesting that his disappearance from school was due to being hidden. Finally, after reviewing all evidence, the jury deliberated for a mere 1 hour before convicting Coleman of capital murder. In the punishment phase of the trial, Coleman's lawyers tried their best to mitigate the death penalty, citing numerous mitigating factors: the illegal nature of her conception, her early exposure to alcohol and drugs, being abused herself leading to foster care, and even a child abuse expert testified about the intergenerational effects of being abused. Coleman's lawyers also argued that she suffered from bipolar disorder, Despite this, the jury rejected all mitigating circumstances and sentenced Lisa and Coleman to death. This verdict sparked much controversy, especially when Coleman's lawyers later argued that she was targeted for the death penalty because she was a black lesbian woman. Did this high sentence truly bring absolute justice for Davontae, or did it leave unanswered questions? Lisa Ann Coleman appealed her death sentence, arguing that no kidnapping occurred because Davontae was in his own home and had been seen walking around the apartment complex before his death. Her lawyers also contended that she was targeted for the death penalty because she was a black lesbian. However, on September 16, 2014, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit rejected the argument against the kidnapping charge, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene. The following day, Coleman was executed by lethal injection with pentobarbital. She was the 15th woman executed in the United States since executions resumed in 1976. Although details about Coleman's last meal or last words were not widely publicized, according to some unofficial sources, she had a salad, stir-fried beef, and a glass of orange juice. Her death closed a tragic chapter in the Davontae case. Did this death bring closure to the victim's family and those who cared about Davontae? The Davontae Williams case is not just a story of a tragic death, but also a stark warning about the child protection system. After Davontae's death and that of several other children in Texas, the governor's office opened an investigation into CPS child abuse investigations. The agency admitted losing track of the Williams family in 2002 and that they frequently moved to avoid investigations. This case prompted a $200 million, 0-cents funding law for CPS in 2005 to hire and train more staff. The Davontae case raises profound questions. What drives people who should have loved and protected Davontae to commit such cruel acts? What is the extent of the government's and society's role in protecting vulnerable children? The pain of Davontae's family, especially the surviving relatives, will never fade. This case reminds us of the cost of indifference and the vital importance of protecting the most vulnerable in society. What are your thoughts on the fate of Lisa Ann Coleman and Marcella Williams and the lessons this story leaves for us?